So those two were the slow sections. Now let's go a little faster because you got your feet under you. Yeah, this is not so bad, right? Yeah, sure. All right, so how many viruses? How many viruses in the world? A lot of viruses. A lot of viruses. For example, did you know that all the water you've encountered in your tiny life, yeah, ponds and swimming, and even if you were to chip off a chunk of a glacier, would be about 10 to the 6th, which is a million, to 10 to the 8th, which is 100 million individual virus particles per milliliter. Yeah. Gargle a little of that ocean water, why don't you? Next time you're there. And this is okay. The water all around us is absolutely chock full of viruses, but so is the soil. Oh my goodness. And so in the water, there are about 10 virus particles per cell that you can find. Yeah, everywhere, all the time. Yeah. In the soil, you will have somewhere between 100 to 1,000 per cell. And most cells in the world are going to be prokaryotic. They're going to be things like bacteria and archaea. But good heavens, do viruses outnumber them? They are by far the most numerous biological thing on Earth. I don't want to say life form because that implies that they're alive, and I think they are the gray area. So, yeah, teach the controversy. There we go. Even the air you're breathing right now, take a good breath, and you just pulled into your lungs somewhere around 2 or 300 individual virus particles. That's about what's in the typical lung volume, and you've done that with every breath for your entire life. Now, most of these viruses that you breathe in are actually viruses of bacteria, viruses of fungus, viruses from the world around us. But it's amazing how many viruses there are everywhere. If you could see them, the world is absolutely crawling in viruses, little tiny mobile bits of genetic material that would just love to be inside of a cell. The other important thing is that viruses do not last long in this world. Most viruses will break down and fall apart within about 24 hours of being formed. So, these viruses, which outnumber cells in every environment where life lives, always, these things are being produced at a phenomenal rate because there are always about 10 of them for every cell anywhere that you look, and they have to be produced basically every day. They are also probably a fairly large part of the biomass of the Earth, if you think of it in those terms. So, little tiny filter feeders may well be consuming the little tiny, it's like little itty bitty Skittles or M&Ms, little bits of protein and nucleic acid. Because if it's not a virus that infects you, then it's just a little bit of biological fuel, basically. Yeah, gobble them up. So here's a really cool one. This is from the lab of a guy called Curtis Suttle. And what he's done here is labeled up a little bit of seawater, and he labeled it with a dye called Syber, SYBR green. And it's one that we use in PCR. Syber green will penetrate into the capsid of a virus or the envelope of a virus and will bind to the RNA or DNA and will light it up. And so what you see here are big dots, which are eukaryotes. And so this is a representative sample. You got one eukaryote. Here you've got medium-sized dots. Those would be the prokaryotes, things like bacteria and archaea. And this one from seawater is probably an algae cell. But this is like representing all of us eukaryotes. Go team eukaryote. So there are about 10 to 20 prokaryotes per eukaryote in the world. And yeah, that's probably an undercount, but they are numerous, very numerous. And then look at all the little tiny dots, all those little things in the background, the little stars in the night sky. Those are the viruses. So these things are swimming around, bumping into cells, entering the cells, destroying the cells, and moving on. If somebody asks you, what's the purpose of life? Well, look at all the viruses, and they're always here. They're everywhere that life is. The purpose of life from a biological point of view looks as though it is to be virus food. And I don't know, that doesn't give us a whole lot to reach for, but if we're talking in purely mechanical terms, I don't, yeah, I think that one's hard to escape. Yeah, so I don't like it, but you don't have to like science for it to be true. All right. So these are from a interesting paper, where some researchers went out to a pond. I think the pond was in France, and they took a core sample that went right down into the deep, deep mud at the bottom. And the top layer was there was some oxygen that was still getting to the bacteria there, but as you core down, you get to areas of the soil that's underneath where there's no oxygen, and there are areas where there are mostly bacteria that essentially breathe methane, and then there are areas of bacteria that mostly use elemental sulfur instead of oxygen, and there are areas of bacteria that'll use predominantly iron as their metabolic carrier. And as they were delving through these different layers, most of the bacteria in these layers are not culturable, or at least have not been cultured by humans, because we live in a world of air, and it's very difficult to get all the air out to be able to culture even one of these things. Let alone, you got to figure out, what do they want to eat, what keeps them happy, what temperature do they like. Oh, yeah. But at every level, they found weird and wonderful virus particles. So some of these have these big icosahedral, or sort of stretched icosahedral heads. Some of them have long sort of tails. Some of the tails are very long. Look at that guy. It's zoomed all the way out. The scale bars are all the same size, 100 nanometers. And they also found, look, enveloped viruses. So the other ones were encapsulated. These guys are enveloped. And you can see some of these look like a little lemon, or a lemon with a tail coming out the backside, or a little bendy straw, I guess. Yeah. Some of them look like, I don't even know what that is, little fried eggs. These kind of look like coronaviruses, but there are no coronaviruses of bacteria that anybody has ever found. So, yeah, who knows what this is. And these kind of resemble herpes viruses. You got that pleomorphic envelope on the outside and an icosahedral core, which is going to have like a hexagon sort of appearance on the inside. So, crazy. Yeah. All kinds of viruses out there. And the other thing they found was that about 1% of the bacteria they recovered appeared to be chock full of little viruses. Just look at that little sausage-shaped bacterium there, absolutely packed full of little virus capsids. And here are a whole bunch. It looks like they're assembling over here. Here are a whole bunch more assembling inside there. And you got some that are even budding. These are would look like envelope viruses budding out of these poor sick bacteria. And the bacteria will probably be dead within minutes of this picture being taken if they hadn't been preserved in formaldehyde first for the image. But yeah. And when you see stuff like this, you come to the conclusion that everything is a little bit infected all the time. That's how viruses manage to stay around. So yeah, walking virus food, you and me. Yeah, don't like it, but here we are. Here's a coronavirus, just because why not? I like coronaviruses. They're the one thing I really understand. And this is in a chicken's trachea, and so here we have the little ciliated epithelial cells, and the cilia are waving back and forth to move the mucus along. And you can see these little pouches that are just full of little tiny virions in there. And we've got a little star next to the replication factories. We're kind of zoomed way out of this one, but you can still see them there. And if we were to zoom in, they would have the double membranes and the little connecting channels. And then look at all the viruses that are coming out of this. If you were to count these things, you would find somewhere around 1,000 virus particles in this one little slice of a cell. The original picture is a little bigger, and it has even more of these things on it. I've actually seen cell sections where you look around the entire cell and counted more than 4,000 virus particles coming out of a little thin slice. So the average virus, it varies, but viruses will often produce about 10,000 virus particles coming out for every one that went in. So one virus starts the infection, and it's just going to go wild, disassembling the cell and turning it into brand new little virus particles. Yeah, that's how viruses work. That is how they roll. And here's another neat virus, just like it. This one is the Sulfolobus turritidicosahedral virus. It only lives in Sulfolobus, which only lives in geothermal hot springs. I think this particular one's only found in Iceland, although you could probably find it in other parts of the world. They just haven't looked yet. The virus comes in. The virus looks like this, infects this cell, which I believe that is an archaean. Yeah, I think that's an archaean, Sulfolobus, but we can look it up, and check. And then to come back out of the cell, the virus actually makes an escape structure. So that's these things. It is a 7-sided pyramid studded with viral proteins, and the little virus particle lines up underneath that, causes the proteins to open up like Stargate, if you're into old movies. But it's like a little pyramid just opening from the top, and then the virus goes out. And then theoretically, the pyramid can close again and reload with another virus and keep going. So it's trapped inside the cell, but it makes itself a little door and then lets itself out, because why not? Why shouldn't viruses do that? And these are some of the coolest viruses. These are some of the largest viruses. One of these called Pithovirus, which is this guy right over here, infects amoeba and was recovered from 30,000-year-old permafrost, so ground that was frozen for 30,000 years. They put it on a culture of amoeba. They just happened to find a virus in there that matched the amoeba that they were growing, which is a real stroke of luck, honestly. And boom, this thing booted up and still worked because it was frozen. And a virus doesn't have to do any sort of metabolism when it's outside the cell. Pandora virus, these things have a huge genome. They're not the biggest virion. That goes to a thing called Mimi virus, and there are a couple of Phycodina viruses that are also very large. But this has the largest genome. It's over 2 million bases, and there are full-on bacterial genomes that are well under 1 million bases. So in terms of size and in terms of genome content, this is larger and more complex than some things which are actually alive. So, yeah, nuts. And like it says over there, there are things that are related to tobacco mosaic virus that they've actually thawed out of the oldest ice cores. They're drilling in Greenland. And you can see a layer each year because it snows and then it gets a little bit warmer, and so it melts a little bit. And then it snows again, and so you get little layers of ice. And in the lowest layers, tobacco mosaic-like viruses that still looked intact, but they didn't infect anything. Now, with a virus that old, you have to ask yourself, is the host it used to infect even still in existence? Yeah, because 30,000 years ago, there were Neanderthals running around, and Denisovan hominids, and so there were several things which were not human still in existence. And so a lot of the viruses, if you're imagining permafrost from 30,000 years, there could be caveman viruses for which there are no longer cave people, to infect. And this is kind of a dead end that viruses can get into, but that's okay. There are always more viruses out there, and viruses are always doing just fine. They do not need any help from us to go about their business. All right, so this is the thing we'll do in class, and so we'll jump past that. Now, one thing I'll do with some of these lectures is I'll leave a thing called an Easter egg in there. And so today's Easter egg is this picture right over here. Can you tell me who is the artist who painted this picture? Your clues are, it's a he, and this is a person who has worked with the Protein Data Bank, which is the place where all of the structures of proteins are housed and shared with everybody. And it's a really good artist, one of my favorite biological illustrators. Who is the artist? Email the answer to bneuman@tamu.edu, and the first one will get extra credit. There's your Easter egg. Yeah. Do it or don't. It's voluntary. Okay. We'll do another section here, and then we'll close off this section. So who gets viruses? Well, the answer is probably everything gets viruses, because bacteria get viruses, archaea get viruses, but the viruses that we know are mostly found in humans. And we get some in arthropods, which are very, very numerous. And we have a couple other little groups of viruses here and there. I think my numbers are a few years old, so some of these zeros are now ones. But yeah, not much bigger than that. But you see how most of the viruses that we know about are viruses of mammals? That's because we go out and study viruses of mammals and look for them very carefully and try to know all that we can about them. Most of the other viruses that are out there are unknown, undiscovered. You can discover viruses anytime you want to, and I'll show you a method to do this. Incidentally, these viruses are moving around in the air, in the water, in the soil, and they've got genetic information inside them. Sometimes they're carrying genetic information from one cell into another cell. There are cases where toxin genes that bacteria use are actually carried on viruses. And so the bacterium is not dangerous, but the bacterium with the virus inserted into it becomes very dangerous. I believe cholera toxin is one that works that way, and Vibrio cholerae. So yeah, kind of interesting. And viruses have been called the dark matter of the biosphere because they're moving around, transporting genes all the time, possibly helping to create new species and regulating definitely the existence of the species that do exist. And because they're so small, they kind of fly under the radar. And so there's all this virus stuff going on, and people don't really know about it because viruses are little. Yeah. So, yeah. If you're a natural treasure hunter, Calvin and Hobbes here, yeah, then, yeah, it's kind of like this. So you dig a hole, and oh my gosh, you're looking for buried treasure. If your buried treasure is viruses, yeah, you will find them even on your first try because there is treasure everywhere. Here's a basic sort of plan for how you can go through and actually find some of these viruses. If you want to try it out, follow the instructions, pull up some viruses. I'm going to make an extra credit assignment a little later in the term, and it's going to be doing this. If you can show me something new that I have not seen before, pull up a virus, which is really not that hard, then yeah, that'll be some extra credit coming your way. So, all right, why not? All right. And those were all things that we found viruses in. That's fine. Different animals. Okay. So let's pause right here, and then we'll do another section, because this is going to be the end for where we should get on class number 1. So this is the end of what I'm going to try to cover there. And the next will be for class number 2 on Wednesday.